Chapter 9 out of 12, The Final Journey. What seems like only a minute or so later, little Phyllis's container was outside, and its contents, little Phyllis included, emptied into the garbage truck. Then, as before, the vehicle started its journey away from the Institute. Little Phyllis inspected her surroundings in the dim light. The usual revolting muck and useless trash, moldy food, a ruined old hearth rug that stank of urine, a broken laundry mangle, bits and pieces of anonymous busted metal and wood. She climbed over the piles of garbage so she could look out of the back. This time, the truck did not stop at all. It chugged and whizzed right through the city. Little Phyllis peered out into the darkness and watched the city begin to diminish behind her. She craned her neck around the side of the truck so she could see where they were headed. There, blotting out the horizon, was a huge blaze. Little Phyllis searched desperately for a solution. She couldn't let her story end this way. She thought about throwing herself out, but the vehicle was moving too fast. She considered giving herself up to the man with the beard and the scar, but she didn't trust him and didn't think she could make herself heard anyway. The truck drew closer and closer to the flames. Little Phyllis could feel the heat. The vehicle reversed right up to the incinerator and stopped. A great orange glow filled her vision and scorched her face. There was a slam of the door as the driver got out. He activated the mechanism, and the back of the truck began to tilt. Bit by bit, the rubbish began to tremble out into the fire. Little Phyllis held on for dear life, looked around frantically for something to save her. Her eyes alighted on the damp old rug. It was rolled up and tied with a string, but there was a small hole in the center. As quick as she could, struggling to find her footing, she pushed herself into the middle of the carpet. Seconds later, she felt a bump and a jolt, and she was out of the truck and surrounded by intense heat. But the carpet was rolling, as she had hoped, and using the weight of her body, she kept it rolling until it traveled past the fire and onto some muddy ground on the other side. It was scorching hot, but the dampness and thickness of the rug had saved her from burning alive. Wheezing and choking from the smoke, she fought her way out of the carpet. Little Phyllis hadn't seriously injured herself, but the shock of the close escape and the fall from the back of the truck, even cushioned by the rug, seemed to have set all the bones in her body trembling. She was dazed and stunned, and, with the mud, rubbish, and white ash from the fire all over her, looked more bizarre than ever. She took a few deep breaths and tried to compose herself. She made her way to the main road, along which cars whizzed every few seconds. In front of her was a bus picking up passengers. It seemed to be heading in the direction she wanted. With a leap, she was on the back bumper. She held on for 15 minutes until the driver spotted her in the rearview mirror and she was forced to let go and walk. It was a journey that seemed to take forever, and as she had very little time, as usual, she had very little time. As she walked, she tried to think, but no clear thoughts would come. It was as if the cold wind and the choking ash in her lungs had fogged the inside of her head. Eventually, she made her way to Sector 6, where Beauty's parents lived. She found it easy to navigate her way through the neighborhood, which was lush and prosperous. There were wide avenues and spotless streets, and houses that were more like mansions, with great gravel paths and Gothic pillars. Security patrol cars cruised the streets at regular intervals, and more than once little Phyllis had to duck behind a tree in case she was spotted. The way she looked, there was little hope that she might be mistaken for one of the rich kids who lived in the area. She was just about to turn the corner onto Beauty's parents' street when she saw a puddle of flashing blue light on the ground and heard the sudden whine of a siren behind her. She looked around and saw a security patrol car drawn to a halt. A man wearing the uniform of the City Protection Company, a division of the Omicron gated communities, emerged. He was tall and heavily built, with a face that was neither stern nor kindly, but trained to look blank and neutral. Little Phyllis's eyes darted around, looking for some means of escape, but she had no chance. She decided to stand her ground. Little Phyllis racked her brain for some seed of an idea that would save her. Good evening, said the security guard. His voice was not unfriendly, but he seemed to be viewing little Felic's disheveled and mud-covered appearance with amusement rather than suspicion. And what might you be up to? The fog in her head suddenly cleared, leaving her mind sharp and pure. She gave a bright, breezy smile and said, with complete confidence and cheerfulness, "Well, what do you think?" She gave a little bow and turned around. "I'm not sure," said the security guard neutrally. "What do I think about what?" "My costume, of course, silly," she said. "My friend's having a costume party. Her daddy is a director of one of the 10 corporations, and it's going to be great fun. But instead of us all getting dressed up, she wants us to come looking poor. Isn't that hilarious? The theme is beggars, outcasts, and narcoholics. It's this season's look. This took me about 2 hours to get right. Do you like it? Do I look really, really horrible?" "Where's the party?" "It's just down there." She spoke the names of Beauty's parents, and the security guard looked impressed. "There's going to be a prize for the best costume. A week on a private island in the Sunlands, and I'm bound to win. My smells are just the best. I had to send my daddy's chauffeur all over the nastiest bits of the city to find the worst smelling stuff. And these clothes I had made by a theatrical company, retailored from the clothes of genuine homeless people. They're so witty and clever, don't you agree?" "I need to ask you a question," said the security man flatly. Little Phyllis braced herself. Now she was sure to be caught. "Are you a boy or are you a girl?" "Okay, Professor Oak." Little Phyllis pretended to be shocked and offended. "How dare you? What do I look like, for heaven's sake?" "Well," said the guard cautiously, not quite sure whether he was dealing with a deranged vagrant or the child of a rich and powerful family. "To be honest, you look vaguely like a boy." "Of course I'm a boy," said little Phyllis indignantly, lowering her voice slightly to make it sound huskier and more masculine. "I know it's a good costume, but you've got eyes in your head, haven't you? You should get yourself some glasses, or you'll always be going around arresting the wrong people." The security guard paused. They had had a call saying there might be a girl loose in the city who had run away from the city community faith school. But this child didn't look like any girl he'd ever seen. His shift was nearly over, and he didn't want to get into trouble for arresting someone whose wealthy family could probably get him sacked if the son, if it really was a boy, took enough offense. "This is a fantastic outfit," he said, smiling. He turned back to his car. "You're bound to win. I've never seen such a sight in all my life." "And what about my smell?" demanded little Phyllis. "What do you think of that? It took me hours to work out how to stink like a proper poor person." The security guard laughed and opened the car door. "You smell absolutely terrible," he told her, climbing into the car. "Have a nice vacation in the Sunlands." He started the engine and drove off, waving to little Phyllis as he went. Little Phyllis waved back, and then quickly covered the 100 yards to the home of Beauty's parents. The house was immaculate. It was set in large grounds with expansive of manicured lawns and tidy flower beds, and was illuminated by hidden spotlights in the front yard, which was the size of the whole exercise yard for the 1,000 girls at the Institute. The house was painted candy pink and had huge stone columns at the front that supported the roof of a large porch. There were lights on behind high windows, and an immense triple garage off to the far side. The house was hemmed in by high railings 3 times the size of little Phyllis, and she knew she could not climb them. Besides, there were signs that said, "Beware of the dogs," and she had heard a distant barking from behind the house. There were large double gates at the entrance, with a speaker grill and a series of buttons. Little Phyllis decided she had no choice but to press the buzzer. She waited for somebody to answer, but instead, an electronic voice issued from the loudspeaker. It was bright and affable, but entirely artificial. "Good evening, and welcome to Sanctuary Mansion. If you have an appointment, please press 1. If you know your security code, please press 2. If you are a vendor or a street salesman or a collector for charity, please move on swiftly. For any other inquiries, please press 3. Little Phyllis could barely reach the buttons, and had to stretch up on tiptoe to press 3. Another electronic voice manifested itself. Good evening. None of the housekeeping staff is available at present. Please leave a message after the tone, and we will attend to you as soon as possible. Thank you for calling. Little Phyllis felt irritated. This was hopeless. Nevertheless, she began speaking into the grill, feeling vaguely foolish. I have come from the institute, the City Community Faith School, so that I can... At that point, the loudspeaker let out a long beep and announced, Thank you for your message. Unfortunately, the night staff is occupied with other duties at the moment and will attend to you as soon as they have the chance. Thank you for waiting. Little Phyllis had heard a car engine in the distance and wondered if it was the security man on his rounds again. She pressed the buzzer again, and the voice repeated itself, asking her to leave a message. This time, she tried to speak as quickly as she could. Your daughter is in trouble. I have a bottle of tears that... But again, the machine interrupted. Thank you for your message. The memory is now full and your message could not be saved. Your visit is much appreciated. Please wait until the night staff has an opportunity to attend to your needs. The machine fell silent. Little Phyllis pounded at the gates with her tiny fists. An answering cry of barks and growls erupted, and several huge dogs began to slouch around the tidy bushes and shrubs. Little Phyllis sighed hopelessly and looked desperately around her. 10 feet to her right was a mailbox marked Sanctuary Mansion. She felt in her pocket for the letter that Beauty had given her. The flap was open, the glue melted. In her haste, as she fumbled with it, the letter fell into a puddle. She picked it up and shook it off. She'd better check that it was still readable, she thought. She didn't know what was in it, but she felt pretty certain what the tone would be. Beauty was proud and haughty and furious with her parents. Little Phyllis expected the note to give them a dressing down, in no uncertain terms, and to demand that they come and fetch her right away. In the reflected light from the illuminated yard, she read Beauty's message, written in a slightly shaky pencil, blurred by water from the puddle. Dear Mom and Dad, I am so sorry for everything I did. I'm sorry I was not a credit to you and that I made you ashamed. Please come and get me. I can't stand this place. I feel so ugly and alone. Please come and save me. It is terrible here. Please listen to little Phyllis, who's the bravest person I have ever known. Everything she says is true. Love. And there was Beauty's real name, which until then little Phyllis had never known. The sound of the engine drew nearer. She could see a blue light flickering through the trees. She knew that if the security guard saw her now, she would have no chance of pulling the wool over his eyes again. Hurriedly, she put the letter back in the envelope, thrust it in the mailbox, and fled as fast as she could. Little Phyllis trudged towards Angel Square, her heart puckering into a dry pouch of disappointment. The small bottle of tears felt like a heavy rock in her pocket. The houses were small and boring now, all much the same, all quite pleasant, as on her previous 2 visits. Ordinary houses full of ordinary people lined ordinary streets. She thought about knocking on a door, but what was the point? Even if they did believe her, one single ordinary family would not be able to do anything. There was no point if the police weren't interested, and the church wasn't interested, and the city boss and all the politicians were in cahoots with the controller, and the rich people wouldn't let you anywhere near them, protected as they were by fences and dogs, and by servants and machines and security guards. Then she saw what gave her the feeling of what must be. Through one of the windows of one of the most ordinary of the ordinary houses, she could see yet another ordinary family. A mother, a father, a daughter, and a son, all staring at the vast vid screen that covered an entire wall of their front room. The remarkable thing was, little Phyllis recognized the father. He had a small scrubby beard and a thin white scar. He was the garbage truck driver. Little Phyllis was certain of it, even though she had only ever glimpsed him in the darkness. He had changed out of his work clothes. He must have just finished his shift. If she was Stargazer, she thought, she would be sure that this was a sign. So, without hesitation, she marched out the path and rang the bell, which let out a deafening jangle. As it rang, the family's expression remained unchanged. Nobody got up. Hot-headed as ever, little Phyllis felt a shock of anger rush through her. She had not come all this way just to be ignored for some stupid vid-screen program. She leaned on the doorbell so that it kept ringing. After several minutes, the door finally opened. It was the man with the beard and the scar. "Do you know what time it is?" he said sternly, looking disapprovingly at little Phyllis's filthy clothes. "I don't have a watch," said little Phyllis sadly, thinking of her father's silver watch that she had given to Stench. "It's 1 minute to 10. The big prize quiz has just finished, and the touchball game between the city and the out-of-cityers is about to begin." There was a pause. Little Phyllis started to speak. "I've got something very important. We are all very upset. We don't like people ringing on our doorbell at any time. But to ring when we are just home from work is positively bad manners. And to ring when we are watching the vid screen is almost beyond—" "Shut up!" bellowed little Phyllis. The man looked as if someone had just slapped him. How dare you speak to me like that?" he said, his face darkening, his scar turning to crimson, but he didn't shut the door. I love that little Phyllis finally said shut up. "My name is Little Phyllis, and I have escaped from the Institute." "The Institute?" repeated the man blankly. "The City Community Faith School. But it's not a school. I say escaped because it is actually a children's prison. You don't know me, but I know you. You drive the garbage truck. It's an awful place, and the controller keeps us all in rags. And we get sick, and some of the girls have died, and we are like slaves, and it is horrible. I can prove it too." With this, she reached into her pocket and drew out the perfume bottle filled with tears. "This bottle is filled with the tears of the children at the Institute. It is the proof of our misery." She held out the bottle. The man looked down at her, clearly shocked, because, like the policeman and the priest, he was not a bad person, and he loved his own children. But he didn't understand more than he wanted to about the world, because it made him uncomfortable and unhappy to think about such unsettling things, even if they were true, especially if they were true. "That can't be the case," said the man, not taking the bottle. "Why?" said little Phyllis. "Because I'm only a child?" "No, not at all," he responded. "I know it isn't true, because if it was, I would have seen it on the vid screen." "That," said little Phyllis, "is stupid. The vid screen, from what I've seen of it, it's like a pantomime on the edge of a battlefield. It distracts you from seeing what's important right there in front of your eyes." "What do you mean?" he asked, looking puzzled. Some light appeared in the man's eyes, some light of intelligence and recognition, that momentarily gave little Phyllis a flicker of hope. "I think I do know you from somewhere," he said haltingly. Then a voice rang out from the front room. "John, it's starting!" The man's eyes went blank again as he looked down at little Phyllis. "I'm really terribly sorry," said the man called John. "I have to go now. I really would like to help you, but the touchball game is about to begin." "It's started, John," came the voice again. A woman appeared by his side. She was tall, pale, thin-lipped, and plainly in a hurry. "Who's she?" "She says her name is Little Frightful or something. She says she's from the City Community Faith School." "What's she doing here, then, interrupting our vid screen?" said the woman crossly. "She says it's not a school at all, but a prison." "What nonsense!" The woman made a snorting sound like a horse. "I'm not doing that." "She says she can prove it." "Garbage," said the woman. "I'm calling the school to complain. The nerve of her!" And with that she disappeared. The man looked worried and somewhat guilty. "I'm most terribly sorry," he said. "I really have to go. Thank you so much for stopping by. If I see something about it on the vid screen, I'll certainly think about getting in touch with the authorities." Little Phyllis gave a sad smile of recognition. Oh my god, I can't speak. Little Phyllis gave a sad smile of resignation. She tried one last time to thrust the bottle of tears into his hands. The man hesitated, then shook his head and slowly turned away. He shut the door in her face. Little Phyllis stood there for what seemed like a very long time, staring at the closed door. Then she turned and threw the bottle of tears into a trash can. Beside the front gate. With her heart in her boots, she made her way to Angel Square for what she knew would be the last time. When she reached the square, a few minutes later, she sat down by the fountain where the angels stood, their lips dry of water, their once beautiful faces worn and decayed. She stared at the angels and spoke to them softly. Truth, courage, and compassion. What a joke! It seemed to her that their blank faces stared back at her, as if trying to communicate some mute, ancient message. In her tiredness and despair, she continued muttering to them. You don't know anything. You're so crumbled down and broken. We aren't the fountains that used to spring from your mouths. You're dumb. You don't have any answers. Little Phyllis was talking loudly now. Why won't the people see together when they've a million eyes? What about Eidolon? Is there just one god? Are there 100 gods? Is there no god at all? Are we at the Institute nothing, just because we have no one? Little Phyllis picked up a pebble and threw it wildly at the nearest angel. It bounced off her wing and fell into the dry base of the mountain. There are so many wires, and I'm just a poor, stupid girl. My head hurts from not understanding. My heart hurts from being alone. Now she stood, a lonely figure in the square, and screamed at the night sky. Where are your answers? The statues were silent. All she could hear was the wind, which blew just as coldly and relentlessly as before. Her heart sank still further into her boots. She looked back at the angels and muttered to herself, Stupid angels, stupid people, stupid me for telling stupid stories. Little Phyllis turned away from where the angels stood mutely on their crumbling plinth and inspected the square. This time the tour bus was not there, just an empty space. She did not care. She no longer believed that there was a place called the Sunlands, or, if there was, it would rain and be cold all the time. Names, she had learned, meant nothing. The Institute called itself a school but was a prison. The people in the city were people the same as she was, had children just like her, but they behaved as if she were an animal because of her appearance and her bad luck to have ended up where she had. Eidolon was meant to look after everyone, but it seemed he only helped people who were neat and tidy and had giant vid screens and expensive cars. She had to go back to the Institute. She knew that if she just disappeared, the other girls would pay the price. She had to go back, admit her failure, and take the blame. She assumed that the man's wife had been as good as her word and had telephoned the controller. So it was that less than an hour later, still not afraid, but sad and rather lonely, little Phyllis found herself back in Hall 7. Gonna give you guys a second to figure it out. Alright, we are on to chapter 10. The lights were still out, and everything seemed to be quiet. Little Phyllis allowed herself a bit of hope. Perhaps the woman had been so absorbed by the vid screen that she'd forgotten to phone the Institute. When she approached her bunk, she sensed that something was wrong but couldn't work out what. As she began to undress, she saw that the pillow seemed somewhat different, somehow, but she was too tired to care. She crouched down to see if Stargazer was awake. There was just a shape under the blankets. Little Phyllis decided that the bad news could wait. She tenderly touched the shape and blew Stargazer a kiss. Warily, she moved the last of her clothes. She couldn't even be bothered to put on her pajamas. Taking a look around the dormitory, she could hear the slow breathing of the girls from the beds all around her. She felt overcome by exhaustion. Little Phyllis pulled back the sheets, yawning, and her face froze in a mask of horror. Lying there, fully dressed in her uniform, was Lady Luck, her marble eyes wide open, and her face set in a terrible, triumphant smile. I shall keep it like that for now. "Surprise!" she said in her fake, sweet voice. Little Phyllis reeled back. She heard another voice, a man's. "You're late." She spun around. The controller had emerged like a phantom out of the shadows. Behind him, the Whistler had her arm around Stargazer's neck. Little Phyllis pulled back the covers of Stargazer's bed to reveal a scattering of pillows. Stench and Bellyache stood behind the Whistler. Stench looked as if she were about to speak, but Little Phyllis gave a little shake of her head. Lady Luck silently rose from the bed and seized Little Phyllis fiercely by the shoulders. She did not struggle. "So, the woman found you after all," said Little Phyllis flatly, almost to herself. "Woman? What woman?" said the controller almost cheerfully. "No one has telephoned." "Oh," said Little Phyllis. She looked around and saw that Tattle was awake in the neighboring bunk, staring at her. "Tattle, I forgive you," she said softly. "I know you didn't mean it." But Tattle shook her head violently. "I didn't tell anyone, Little Phyllis," she said. "I swear." "It's all right, Tattle. You can't help who you are. I should never have told you about the plan in the first place. It was my fault." "Actually, she's telling the truth," said the controller. But I don't understand," said Little Phyllis, bewildered. "How did you find out?" Now the controller looked at Stargazer, who was still in the Whistler's grip. She was holding herself absolutely rigid. "She betrayed you," he said matter-of-factly, nodding at Stargazer. "Your very best friend of all." Little Phyllis turned her gaze on Stargazer, whose face now looked anguished and contorted. "What is he talking about, Stargazer?" At first, Stargazer didn't answer, but simply stared at the floor. But finally, after a long silence, she did speak, voice cracked and marbled with guilt. "It's true." Little Phyllis couldn't believe what she was hearing. The world seemed to swim before her eyes. Stargazer's eyes were welling up with tears. She spoke again, more urgently this time, as if pleading for forgiveness. "I told on you. It was never Tattle, always me. I told them about the stories you told us. That's how the controller knew about them. If I didn't spy for them, they threatened to have you taken away. Then you made your plans to escape. After that, I decided to keep quiet and try to throw off the controller of the scent by making stuff up about being other girls, not you at all. But in the end, I believed my vision was going to come true, that you were going to die if you kept trying to escape. So I told on you, but not until this final time, when I felt you were in the most danger. That's why the ex-girls were waiting for you at the trash heaps. I tried to talk you out of going, and I thought I could, but you wouldn't change your mind." Little Phyllis was silent. "Say something, Little Phyllis. Don't you see? I did it for you. I had to stop you from dying. I had to. I betrayed you because I love you, Little Phyllis." Stargazer burst into tears. Little Phyllis smiled sadly. "You see, Z73?" asked Little Phyllis. "No one can be trusted. That is why we need rules. They are the only things you can rely on in the end," said the controller quietly. Now Bellyache seized Little Phyllis as well. She and Lady Luck stood on either side of her, their fingers gripping her hard enough to raise the vivid red marks on her skin. She was still undressed, and she grabbed her old tweed jacket to try and cover herself up. The fact she's naked doing all of this, oh my god. The controller made an announcement in a voice loud enough to wake the slumbering girls. "Everyone awake and out of their beds, right now." And within a few minutes, everyone was up, standing, and gaping at the forlorn figure of Little Phyllis. naked apart from a ragged jacket. Stargazer was still crying. Stench looked unhappy, but the Whistler and Bellyache and Lady Luck seemed to be thoroughly enjoying themselves. The girls stared at the sight in front of them. There was silence. No one moved a muscle. No one, not even Beauty, Soapdish, or Tattle, spoke a word of protest. "We have caught the child who left the protection of the school," said the controller, his voice low and hypnotic. "Look at her carefully. Look at her. Nearly naked and pathetic and more lost than ever before. Take your last look. Then forget. Forget everything. It will be better for you all. Only in forgetting is there peace." There was silence and stillness. Then the ex-girls started to take little Phyllis away. Still nobody moved and nobody said anything. Only Stargazer screamed and shouted. "Stop them! It's little Phyllis, the bravest of the brave. If we lose her, we are all lost. If we forget her, we will all be forgotten. Stand and fight. There are more of us than them. Stand together." But it was just Stargazer. No one took any notice of her. Stargazer alone tried to push away the ex-girls as they led little Phyllis from the dormitory. Then she threw her arms around little Phyllis's neck and held on tight. Just before Lady Luck and the Whistler finally pried her away, Stargazer heard little Phyllis whisper something in her ear, something only she could hear. Only then did she let go. A few minutes later, little Phyllis found herself in a small, darkened room in the control block, facing the controller. They were alone. Little Phyllis shivered in her jacket. The controller reached under the table and brought out a large, plain woolen blanket. He handed it to little Phyllis. Eagerly, she wrapped it around herself. She gazed at the controller, waiting for what would happen next. The controller himself seemed unsure. After maybe a minute of complete silence had passed, his face resolved into a kind of tired resignation. He brought out a large, leather-bound book and let it drop onto the table in front of him with a dull thud. "Do you know what this is, little Phyllis?" asked the controller quietly. His voice sounded different to her. Less harsh, less dry, almost human. And he said her nickname. Not her number, her nickname, without contempt. Little Phyllis shook her head and gathered the blanket tighter around her. "It is the Book of Rules," he said simply. "I know them already," she muttered, not prepared for another lecture about all the things she wasn't allowed to do in the Institute. "You don't understand," he continued. "They are not your rules, they are my rules. They are issued to me by the city boss and the 10 corporations. Just as you have to follow rules, I also have to do what I am told." There was another pause. The controller seemed to be struggling with himself. He looked down at the floor. When he looked up again, he seemed to almost be pleading with little Phyllis. "I've devoted much of my life to following rules. After many difficult and painful experiences, I have learned that it is for the best, however hard and unfair it may seem. That is what I've tried to teach you in this place, little Phyllis. You are too young to make sense of the world. There are things, I know that." He paused and seemed to gather himself for a second. "There are things you don't know and can't know. And believe me, what is about to happen must happen. It must happen because it is in the rules. And without the rules, there is nothing. We are all lost." Little Phyllis gazed at him, her eyes wide. "What difficult and painful experiences?" she asked. "I beg your pardon?" The controller looked confused. "You said you have had many difficult and painful experiences. What were they?" Little Phyllis held him in her gaze. Suddenly, it was as if he were the captive and she were the one imprisoning him. He wriggled and shifted uncomfortably. "You like stories, don't you?" Little Phyllis nodded. You think they make things easier. You think we are all better off for telling stories to one another and to ourselves. Little Phyllis nodded again. The controller grimaced as if in pain, and then spoke again. Let me tell you a story then. Is it a true one? She asked immediately. The controller didn't answer her question. He simply started speaking. At first his voice was so soft, little Phyllis could hardly hear him. But as he went on, his voice became stronger, louder, more powerful, almost as if it were a different person telling the story. I am not doing a different voice for this entire story. That's too much. Once there was a man, just an ordinary man, a young man. He was young at a time when the city was still free, before the bombs and the terror and the law of the army and the police and the city boss, and before rule after rule after rule. He loved his freedom. He breathed it in. It enriched his blood. It made him so alive. He traveled and read books and had many friends. In those days, there were no identity cards, no laws dictating what you could or couldn't say, or what kinds of jokes were allowed and what kinds forbidden. He met women, many women. They liked him, but he liked his freedom too much to get involved with any of them. He kept his distance. He was a wanderer and a rogue. Everyone smiled when he came their way. He was popular. Everyone wanted to be his friend. Then, without any warning, he fell in love. The controller faltered. It seemed he couldn't speak. Who did he fall in love with? Prompted little Phyllis softly. He fell in love with the most beautiful woman you could ever imagine. Not just beautiful in her face, but in her mind, you see. She was like a bubbling spring of water. She was like the south wind. She was like a wave of light curving into the blue depths of the ocean. Little Phyllis was amazed. The controller's face had changed utterly. Always so dead and colorless. It actually seemed alive for the first time. He nodded to himself, smiling, as if remembering. Then his face settled into stone again, and his voice became once more dead and emotionless. Then the bombs came, he said, bitterness lacing his voice. Those who worshipped Oroborous decided they wanted to destroy the city boss and the 10 corporations. They hated the false god, Eidolon. They hated the Democranes. They hated it all, and they waged war against us. The controller fidgeted with his hair. Even through his mirrored glasses, it seemed that he could not meet little Phyllis's gaze, instead focusing on a spot just above her head. Avoiding eye contact. The city boss and the 10 corporations responded by taking away the freedoms that young man loved so much. The freedom to say what he wanted, to be who he wanted. The freedoms to read and watch what he wanted. The freedom to walk down the street unchallenged, without having to show papers to the police. All these things began to disappear, and the city boss and the 10 corporations became more and more powerful and tyrannical as the fear in the city grew and grew. When that happened, the young man started to hate the city boss and the 10 corporations too. In fact, he even had sympathy for the followers of Oroborous, because they were poor and dispossessed and angry. He came to believe that his enemies' enemies had to be his friends. He couldn't blame them for what was happening to his beloved city, so he turned his anger onto the city boss and the 10 corporations. Now at last he seemed to look directly at little Phyllis. She could see herself reflected in his glasses. She saw her own face, pale but unafraid. He decided he had to do something about it. He became a freedom fighter. They called him a Spartacan and a fomenter, but he was none of these things. He was fighting for liberty. In their eyes, though, he was simply an insurgent. He attacked the city government. He arranged protests. Eidolon helped me. He even hurt people, innocent people, so that the city boss would be under pressure to give the citizens back their freedom. Now the controller stopped, as if incapable of speaking anymore. A cold, clammy atmosphere filled the room. Little Phyllis could hear the distant sounds of voices and movements outside the four walls. They were together, he and the woman he loved. They were bold and brilliant. No one could capture them. Their plans were impeccable. They were outlaws, and, to tell you the truth, they loved it. They believed that their god, not Eidolon, not Ormazd, but the god of human freedom, was on their side. The woman was amazing, little Phyllis, amazing. She could run fast, she could talk fast, not me. She could think fast. She was honest and true, and like no one anybody had known before. He became famous, although it was she who was the brilliant one. He even had a nickname, Oroborous, the snake eating its own tail. He was said to be the mastermind, the villain behind all the plots there ever were. But some of the people who believed in freedom instead of tyranny, loved him. And then... The controller's voice faltered again, then strengthened into a monotone. And then the lights grew dark. The spring dried up. The wind was stilled. What? Asked little Phyllis. The woman died, said the controller, chewing on his fingernails. It seemed he was going to end the story there. He picked up the leather-bound book and stood up. But as soon as little Phyllis said, "How did she die?" he sat meekly back down again and continued. That's slightly funny. She was blown up by an outlander's bomb, by a fanatical worshipper of Ormazd. She had said something that they believed insulted their god, so they killed her like a dog. Blew up the car she and 3 others were in. All of them died. And someone else died too. The young man died, although he was nowhere near the car, though he did not even have a scratch on him. Little Phyllis nodded. She felt like a priest taking confession. She looked directly at the controller. He was shaken. Then she spoke. "And who was he? Who was this man?" she asked him gently. The controller didn't answer. Instead, he very slowly rolled up the right sleeve of his shirt, exposing his arm. Just above the wrist, he picked at the flesh. Then, horribly, the skin began to peel back. It took little Phyllis a couple of seconds to realize the skin wasn't skin at all, but a thin, flesh-colored plastic strip designed to blend in exactly with the rest of his arm. Underneath the plastic was the tattoo of a snake eating its own tail. "Oroborous!" gasped little Phyllis. The controller shook his head and slowly pulled the strip of plastic back over the tattoo. "Oroborous is dead," he said flatly. "He died when the woman he loved died. After that, he realized that freedom was a trick and a ruse and a lie. That there was nothing more important than law and order. That the madness of the fanatics must be crushed at all costs. So he surrendered himself to the city boss, and said he would do everything he could in his power to help him bring the insurgency under control." He laughed suddenly, a bitter, knowing laugh that was ugly to hear. They were clever, I'll give them that. Anybody less intelligent would have announced the capture of Oroborous and paraded him before the crowds. But no, they understood, they still do, that the people need a boogeyman to keep them in order and afraid. So even now they pretend that Oroborous continues to roam free, blowing up people and buildings. The police always getting closer and closer, but never quite catching him. As long as Oroborous is at large, the city is in grave danger, and they can do anything at all, to try to ensure his capture. But of course, the moment they actually catch him, the period of fear will be over, and they will have to start relaxing all the rules again. And they love the rules, because they love power, like all governments. It was after they captured me that they decided to set up the school, the Institute. It struck them as amusing to make me its controller. Me, the man who tried to bring the city freedom, now responsible for imprisoning children, children, without trial or hope of release. They realized it would simultaneously punish me and make me useful. And I turned out to be a good administrator, an excellent controller. Why? Because I no longer believe in freedom. Because I believe in order at any cost. At any cost. As he spat out these last words, the controller regarded the book of rules again. Then he looked up a little fearless. He sighed, and his voice reverted again into one of sadness and resignation. That is all there is, the rules. Nothing beyond the rules. And the rules tell me quite clearly what is to be done with any child who tries to escape from the Institute. I'm here to carry those rules out. And they shall be carried out. At this, a change suddenly came over the controller, as if his normal self had suddenly appeared again, even deader and colder than before. You need to learn, girl. You need to learn the truth about the world, just as I did. He rose and made to leave. But why? Asked Little Fearless urgently. Why are you telling me this? The controller shook his head almost violently. No. He began to walk toward the door. You think I am cruel, but I'm not. Not that cruel, no. I just carry out what needs to be done. What the city boss and the 10 corporations tells me needs to be done, and said. You don't need to know any more. What I've told you is explanation enough. But, the controller held up his hand. You're right to hate me, Z73. Hate me all you need. There are far worse things than hate. Truly there are. I know that far better than you can imagine. We now caught up, yay. But, said Little Fearless, desperate for more information. Why, Oroborous? Because that, said the controller slowly and with infinite sadness, is what people do. In the days and nights that followed, there was much talk about Little Fearless. Many of the children were adamant that she had gotten what she deserved. Subdish, Beauty, and Tattle, who were upset at losing their friend, became angry at Little Fearless because it was less painful than feeling sorry for her. Stargazer stood up for Little Fearless and said that she was a hero, that everyone should try to be like her. But nobody listened to her. A few of the children, Z-girls, lowest of the low, stood by Stargazer and talked and told stories at night of the legend of Little Fearless. Occasionally, graffiti would appear scrawled on the walls. Never forget Little Fearless, or sometimes just the letters LF. The controller was clever, though. Now that Little Fearless was gone, most of the girls noticed that although the Institute was still terrible, it was slightly less terrible since Little Fearless had disappeared. Then he promoted Little Fearless's friends, Tattle, Beauty, and Subdish, to ex-girls, where they learned to bully and be lofty and arrogant. Tattle, when she did imitations of people nowadays, no longer copied ex-girls or the controller, but instead ridiculed Y and Z girls. Beauty loved her new uniform, and as they had proper mirrors in the control block where the ex-girls lived, she spent a lot of her time attending to her face and hair, which she was allowed to grow again. And Subdish was delighted to be where there were plenty of soap and where everything was tidy and in proper order. The controller never referred to Little Fearless again when addressing the children at Sunday gatherings, and he instructed all the ex-girls to do the same. Some of the Y and Z girls still talked about her, and some told stories, but after a while the talking and the stories faded. After a little more time had passed, the ex-girls began to hint that there was never any such person as Little Fearless, that she herself had always just been a story. At first, the children thought this was insane. To think that anyone could believe that something that had really happened was just a story. But then, when they thought about it, no one could remember very clearly what Little Fearless had looked like. All the Y and Z girls had, for a long time, looked the same and dressed the same. Little Fearless had, in those last days, been hard to distinguish from all the other girls. They had no history books to remind them of what had happened in the past, no newspapers to tell them what was happening in the present. So more and more of the children began to wonder if the things little Fearless had done were just in their imaginations. The controller instructed his spies to repeat, with absolute certainty, that there had never been any such person. The other girls, faced with unshakable convictions, began to lose faith in their own memories. Eventually, any time anybody did mention her, someone was bound to say, "Don't waste your time on make-believe," or "If you believe in that, you'll believe in anything," or "Good words make history, bad words make misery." However, there was one person left who was absolutely sure that there had been someone called Little Fearless. The last thing Little Fearless had whispered to Stargazer was, "Remember me." And Stargazer had sworn to herself that she would remember, come what may, to anybody who would listen. She would say, "But you must remember Little Fearless. She was the bravest and the best." However, the other girls didn't want to listen. Their guilt and their shame at abandoning Little Fearless was too great. After a while, they began to say that Stargazer was crazy. After all, that was why she had been brought to the Institute in the first place. Eventually, a day came when even Stargazer herself began to think that she was insane, just as the doctors at the orphanage had once told her. "Perhaps," thought Stargazer, "Little Fearless is just one of my strange visions, someone who never existed after all." One day, the controller sent his 3 chief ex-girls into the work block to find out who still believed in Little Fearless. Lady Luck saw Stargazer working quietly in the laundry, scrubbing away stains and spots from the clothes. She spoke loudly in front of all the other girls. "Look, there's that mind crip who thinks there really was such a person as Little Fearless." And slowly, deliberately, Stargazer turned her head and snapped, before anyone could laugh at her. "No, it's a lie." Bellyache cast a stony glance at Stargazer. "It's true. She believes that there was once a girl who went to the city in the back of a garbage truck." Some of the other girls started sniggering. Sniggering? I feel like that's a typo. And pointed at Stargazer. "There never was such a person," insisted Stargazer. The Whistler stared at her doubtfully. Stargazer turned on her angrily. "There was no one. No girl has ever escaped from the Institute. No one ever will." Then she turned back to her laundry and began scrubbing twice as hard as before. So that day, Lady Luck, Bellyache, and the Whistler reported back to the controller that there were no girls left in the Institute who believed that Little Fearless had ever existed. The controller looked satisfied behind his tinted glasses and decided that the matter was now completely closed. And that is all we shall be reading for now.